AITA for refusing to go to my sister's wedding after finding out only our side of the family were having to pay to attend. She wanted me to be her wallet. I never thought I would be the type of person to back out of my own sister's wedding, but here I am, sitting with my phone on silent because she and her fiancé won't stop calling, and I honestly can't bring myself to answer anymore. I know from the outside looking in, it probably seems dramatic, and I'm sure plenty of people in my family think I'm being over the top or petty. But I also feel like I've been lied to, taken advantage of, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to smile my way through a 4-day luxury destination wedding when I know what I know. So my younger sister, Katie, is getting married this April. She's 28, her fiancé Chris is 29, and they've been together for about 6 years. Katie has always had expensive taste. She's always been the type to dream big, luxury holidays, designer bags, fancy cars, and apparently, her wedding was going to be no different. From the moment she got engaged, it was clear this wasn't going to be some quaint little ceremony at a country house or a tasteful hotel reception. No, Katie wanted the full-on, over-the-top, influencer-style, wedding with multiple events, lavish decor, and the kind of aesthetic that's designed to be photographed, not actually enjoyed. And the destination? Dubai. Now, Dubai weddings aren't cheap. Everyone knows that. But Katie and Chris both have decent jobs, and they're not exactly living paycheck to paycheck. Katie alone is on $88,000 a year, and Chris earns more than she does. I don't know the exact figure, but enough that they live in a nice house, go on frequent holidays, and don't really seem to have to worry about money in the way most people do. So when they announced that the wedding would be a 4-day extravaganza in Dubai, complete with pool parties, rehearsal dinners, boat trips, and black tie receptions, none of us were particularly shocked. It was very on brand for Katie. What did shock me a little was the expectation that not only would my husband and I fly out for all 4 days, but that my parents would as well, and not just fly out, but stay in the same luxury hotel as the bridal party. Katie was very clear that she wanted her bridesmaids, of which I am maid of honor, the groomsmen, and the immediate family all under the same roof to make things easier for scheduling events, photo ops, and keeping everyone together. In theory, I get it. In reality, this hotel is ridiculously expensive, and between the flights and accommodation, it's coming out at just over $2,900 per person. And that's just for the basics, never mind food, outfits, spending money, or any of the extras that come with a wedding like this. We knew it was going to be expensive, but my husband and I both work, we budgeted for it, and while it's painful, we could afford it. My parents, on the other hand, are not wealthy people. They're comfortable, but comfortable in a very normal, working middle-class way. They do not have luxury holiday budgets just lying around, and spending nearly $6,000 to attend a wedding, even their daughter's wedding, is a huge, huge expense for them. But because it's Katie, and because she's always been the golden child to some extent, they agreed to it. Then, about 6 months ago, Katie and Chris came to us with a problem. They sat my parents and me down, my husband wasn't there for this conversation, and told us that there had been an unexpected cost increase. They were vague about the details, just saying that Dubai's legal requirements had changed and the venue needed more money up front to secure the dates. They were panicking because without this extra $17,000, they said they would lose their deposit, the venue, and all the other bookings that were tied to it. It was one of those situations where the money needed to be paid immediately, and they would pay us back over time, but they couldn't cover it all themselves right then. I'll be honest, I didn't love the idea of handing over $7,000, that was my share, my parents covered the other $10,000, but it was my sister. I figured, weddings are expensive, and if this was the difference between her dream wedding happening or not, I could make it work. My parents felt the same. We were told it was a short-term loan, they would start paying it back after the wedding, and we all agreed to it. Fast forward to about a month ago. I was talking to one of Chris' cousins, someone I'm friendly with but not super close to, and she let slip, completely offhand, that she was surprised we were all paying to come to Dubai when Chris' parents weren't paying a penny for their flights or their accommodation. I was confused and asked what she meant, and she casually explained that Katie and Chris had covered the full cost of Chris' parents' trip, as well as his 2 brothers and his nephew. Flights, hotel, everything. I was stunned. None of this had ever been mentioned. I thought maybe there was a misunderstanding, so I asked Katie directly. And that's when the whole story came out. Chris' family had balked at the cost when they saw how much it would be, and they flat out refused to come. Rather than risk his family missing the wedding, Katie and Chris decided to pay for all of them, but instead of being honest about it, they lied and said the $17,000 was for the venue. I asked her, point blank, why they didn't just pay for both sets of parents if they were going to cover costs for his family. Her answer was that my parents could afford it and his family couldn't, so it was the fair thing to do. I asked how it was fair to lie to us, to take money from me and our parents under false pretenses, and to prioritize his family so blatantly. She had no real answer. She got defensive, said planning a wedding is stressful enough without everyone attacking her, and that they did what they thought was best. My parents were disappointed, but they've decided to just let it go and still attend. They're the kind of people who hate conflict and would rather just keep the peace, even if it's at their own expense. But I can't. It feels so incredibly slimy, like we were manipulated into funding his family's luxury holiday, while my parents are draining their savings to attend the same wedding. I told Katie I wasn't coming. I said I couldn't support something that felt so dishonest and unfair, and that I didn't want to be part of a wedding where my own sister saw me and our parents as a financial safety net to be lied to and used. Since then, both Katie and Chris have been blowing up my phone, alternating between guilt trips and accusations that I'm ruining their day and making them feel awful. They've told me I'm being dramatic, that I'm putting money ahead of family, that I'm making a big deal out of nothing and holding a grudge when all they were trying to do was make sure Chris' parents could be there. I don't know. Maybe I am being stubborn. Maybe I should just grit my teeth, go to Dubai, smile for the photos, and let it go. But every time I think about sitting at that wedding, watching my parents struggle to enjoy themselves after spending thousands they couldn't afford, while Chris' family enjoys a fully paid luxury trip that we were tricked into subsidizing, I feel sick. It doesn't feel like something I can just get over. So, am I the asshole for refusing to go to my sister's wedding? Should I suck it up for the sake of family, or am I right to draw a line when my own sister saw me as a walking wallet? Update 1. Thanks again for all the feedback, everyone. I honestly wasn't expecting so many responses, and it's been incredibly validating to hear from people who can see where I'm coming from. I know not everyone agrees, and that's fine. I put it out there because I genuinely wanted to know if I was being unreasonable, but hearing from so many of you who have dealt with similar family dynamics has made me feel a lot less alone. Just another quick FYI, a few people have asked about Chris' family, or seem to have the impression that they're well off, and I wanted to clear that up because it's actually a big piece of the puzzle that I probably should have included earlier. I'm obviously not privy to their full financial situation, I'm not sitting there combing through their bank statements, but from the little bits and pieces I do know, mainly from things Katie has told me over the years, Chris' family is very, very poor. Chris grew up in a very different environment than we did. Our family was never wealthy, but we were stable. We had holidays every couple of years, my parents were able to help with university costs, there was always enough to cover the basics and a bit extra. Chris' family, from what I understand, lived in real poverty. There were times they couldn't pay the heating bill, times they had to rely on food banks, and from what Katie's told me, Chris' parents are still in a pretty precarious financial position even now. I always felt sympathy for him over that. It's not something a kid chooses, and if anything, I admired the way he'd managed to build a good career and a comfortable life for himself despite the odds. But looking back, I can see there were cracks even early on. Chris has always had this almost compulsive need to present a certain image, especially to our side of the family. In the beginning, it came off as just slightly insecure, the way he'd make a point to mention expensive restaurants they'd been to, the brands of the clothes he wore, the house prices in their area. It was noticeable, but not obnoxious, and I honestly thought it was harmless. Everyone has their little insecurities, and if growing up without money left him with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, who could blame him? It was only later that I started to catch him in these weird, seemingly pointless lies, things like where he went to school or what kind of house he grew up in. At first, I brushed it off because it felt harmless. If he wanted to polish his backstory a little to feel more comfortable around us, fine. But over time, it became obvious that this was more than just harmless exaggeration. It was like his whole self-worth was tied to how much money he had, how expensive his life looked from the outside, how successfully he could erase any trace of the poverty he came from. It's actually kind of sad when you think about it, but at the same time, it doesn't excuse the way he's handled any of this. My guess, and obviously, I can't know for sure, but based on everything I've seen and heard, is that when Chris' family saw how much it was going to cost to attend this wedding and flat out said they couldn't afford it, Chris absolutely panicked. This whole wedding, the location, the luxury hotel, the over-the-top schedule, all of it was about projecting this curated image of success. I'm sure in his mind, the idea of people noticing that his own parents and brothers weren't there, and the inevitable questions about why, would have been unbearable. He would either have to admit they couldn't afford it or admit that he couldn't afford to pay for them, and either option would shatter the image he spent his entire adult life carefully building. I understand that there's probably a lot of childhood shame and trauma tied up in all of this, and I don't judge him for that. Honestly, I don't. I can completely empathize with how hard it must be to grow up with nothing, finally get yourself to a place where you feel secure, and then have all of that insecurity come rushing back the second you're confronted with the reality that your family still lives in that same cycle of poverty. But the part one can't forgive, and what makes me so angry every time I think about it, is the fact that none of this was discussed openly. None of this was planned for or factored into the actual cost of the wedding. None of this was acknowledged until they had already backed themselves into a corner and decided to lie their way out of it by taking money from us under false pretenses. If Chris' family attending was such a deal-breaker, why not be upfront about that from the start? Why not sit down with both sets of parents, explain the situation, and either budget for all the parents to attend or choose a wedding that didn't require anyone to shell out thousands of pounds just to be there? There were so many options they could have explored. They could have chosen a destination closer to home, or somewhere more affordable. They could have scaled down the events to make the trip less expensive. They could have paid for all 4 parents equally, or worked with both families to come up with a compromise. But instead, they chose the laziest, most dishonest option. They picked the wedding they wanted, they covered Chris' family quietly to avoid embarrassment, and they handed my parents a $6,000 bill and expected them to just suck it up, all while lying directly to our faces about where the money was going. I'm sure to Chris and Katie, this is all justified because they were just trying to make sure his family could be there, but that excuse falls apart the second you realize that my parents, who are not wealthy by any stretch, were left paying their own way without even being given the truth. I keep coming back to the same point in my head, over and over. If it was such a deal-breaker for his family to be there, they should have factored in the cost of paying for all parents to attend instead of thrusting a $3,000 per person bill at them and expecting them to rock up. Update 2. I wasn't planning to post again, but things have escalated in ways I never expected, so here we are. After my last update, I went completely no contact with Katie and Chris. I muted their numbers, ignored every call and text, and just tried to focus on my own life. My parents, being the eternal peacemakers they are, kept telling me I was making too big a deal out of this and that I'd regret missing my sister's wedding. They kept pushing the angle that weddings are stressful, people do stupid things under pressure, and families are supposed to come together at times like this, not pull apart. But the more distance I got from the whole situation, the clearer it became that I wasn't just angry, I felt fundamentally betrayed, like something broke between me and Katie that couldn't be easily fixed. It wasn't just about the lie, or the money, or the fact that my parents' retirement fund was being treated like a communal piggy bank. It was the casual way Katie and Chris had made those decisions, the sense of entitlement, the ease with which they manipulated us into financing Chris' family's holiday under the guise of a fake crisis. It was realizing that for all the years I believed Katie and I were close, I was never anything more than an optional resource to her, something to tap into when the Instagram perfect version of her life needed an invisible financial backbone. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and there was no way I was going to plaster a fake smile on my face and play along just to keep the peace. Well, a few days ago, my husband came home from work looking like someone had just hit him with a brick. I thought maybe he'd had a horrible day or gotten bad news from someone in his family, but when he finally sat down and told me what had happened, it was so absurd I didn't even know how to process it at first. Katie and Chris had officially gone nuclear. They didn't just vent to my parents or complain to a few family members, they went straight to my husband's parents. 2 people they barely know, who they've only interacted with at a handful of polite family functions, were suddenly recruited as potential mediators in their desperate campaign to pressure me into attending. Apparently, Chris convinced himself that if my husband's family could be brought in, they would somehow be able to talk sense into me and get me to back down. In their warped logic, if my in-laws made it clear that they were disappointed in my behavior, I would be so embarrassed that I'd cave and show up in Dubai like a good little sister. But instead of just presenting their side, they spun an absolutely unhinged version of events designed to make me look like the villain. Katie and Chris told my in-laws that I was demanding they pay for my flights and hotel because I was jealous of how much money they were spending on Chris' family. They framed it as though I was furious that Chris' family was getting special treatment, and they claimed I was punishing them by threatening to ruin the wedding unless they covered all my costs too. They painted me as this petulant, greedy sister throwing a tantrum because I wasn't the center of attention, someone so bitter and petty that I would happily tear my own family apart just to soothe my bruised ego. My in-laws knew something was off immediately. They've known me for years and have seen how I handle family situations, and none of it matched what they were hearing. They called my husband directly, and when he laid out the actual story, the fake venue crisis, the manipulated loan, the thousands my parents and I had already handed over to fund a wedding that was increasingly starting to feel like a grift, my in-laws were livid. Not just because Katie and Chris had lied to them, but because they tried to weaponize them against their own son and daughter-in-law, dragging them into a family mess they had no business being part of. My in-laws didn't sit on the information either. They called my parents directly to let them know what was going on, and that's when everything truly fell apart. My mom, the queen of conflict avoidance, the person who would normally sooner swallow a bottle of nails than openly criticize either of her daughters, broke down and admitted she had been feeling physically ill about the entire situation for weeks. She told my in-laws that she hadn't been sleeping properly, that she and my dad had had quiet conversations behind closed doors about whether they should just pull out of the wedding entirely, but every time they got close to that decision, the guilt of all the money they'd already spent would drag them back. My dad, who almost never raises his voice, ended up in a full-blown screaming match with Katie over the phone. He accused her of lying, manipulating, and using her own family like disposable ATMs. He told her that every bit of goodwill and trust they had in her was gone, and that the only reason they were still coming was because they couldn't stomach throwing thousands of pounds down the drain with nothing to show for it. My mom didn't say much during that call, but according to my dad, when he told Katie they were deeply disappointed in her, my mom just quietly agreed. For my parents, who normally operate on forced smiles and passive-aggressive silence, that's the equivalent of an emotional nuclear strike. The wedding is now less than 2 months away, and what should have been a celebration has turned into a full-blown family civil war. My parents are still going to Dubai, but they're dreading it. My mom admitted to me privately that she's considering faking a migraine and skipping at least one of the events just to avoid being around Chris' family, who still have no clue that the lavish trip they're being treated to is funded almost entirely by my parents' savings and my emergency fund. My dad's so angry that I honestly have no idea how he's going to get through 4 days of pretending everything's fine. As for me, the bridge between me and Katie isn't just burned, it's been napalmed, bulldozed, and the ground it stood on has been salted for good measure. I told her in no uncertain terms that I wasn't coming, not now, not ever. There's no apology that could fix this, no amount of smoothing over that could make me pretend I didn't see who she really was when push came to shove. I'm not her sister anymore in any meaningful sense, I'm just a resource she tapped into when she needed money, and now that I've refused to play that role, I'm nothing to her. And because life loves irony, Chris' cousin, the same one who accidentally exposed the initial lie, sent me a screenshot from the private wedding WhatsApp group Katie and Chris have with his family. For weeks now, they've been painting me as the selfish, bitter sister who can't handle her baby sister living her best life. They've told everyone that I'm refusing to come because I can't stand being upstaged, because I'm too insecure to watch Katie marry someone wealthy in a glamorous destination wedding, and because I'm jealous that Chris' family is getting the red carpet treatment while I have to pay my own way like everyone else. Meanwhile, Chris' parents still believe they're being treated out of love and generosity, with no clue that the entire thing is secretly funded by the people they've been told are bitter and selfish. They have no idea that my parents' retirement and my own savings account are underwriting their luxury holiday. They think Katie and Chris just wanted to show them how much they're loved, and I can't decide if that's the saddest or the most infuriating part of all of this. There's no happy ending here, at least not for now. There's no cathartic family reunion, no big moment where everyone comes to their senses and sees the truth. There's just a fractured family, my devastated parents, my husband's furious parents, and a wedding I will never attend. All I can say is, if anyone's wondering whether a destination wedding is worth blowing up your entire family dynamic over, it's not. Update 3. This is probably my last update because, well, the story took a turn I didn't see coming, and at this point, I'm just trying to move on. After the family explosion, I figured the dust would settle and Katie and Chris would just go through with their Dubai show without me. I assumed they'd spin some story to the guests about me being too busy or having a scheduling conflict, and they'd pose for their photos, clink their champagne glasses, and pretend the drama never happened. I was wrong. I underestimated how deeply insecure Chris actually is, and how far he'd go to protect his image. A few days after my parents' confrontation with Katie, my phone rang with a call from Chris' older brother, Mark. To say I was surprised would be an understatement. Mark and I have never been close. He's always been polite when we've crossed paths at family events, but we've never had a one-on-one conversation, so when his name popped up, I almost didn't answer. Curiosity got the better of me, though, and thank God it did, because what Mark told me was the final piece in the puzzle, the one that confirmed just how deep this mess really went. Mark sounded uncomfortable right away, the kind of tone you recognize immediately when someone's debating whether they even want to say what they called to say. But once he started talking, it was like he couldn't stop. Chris had borrowed money from him too. Not for the wedding itself, but for the ring. That enormous, multi-carat monstrosity Katie plastered all over Instagram, the one with the professional engagement photos and a teary caption about her dream proposal, was bought with money Chris never had. Chris had taken out some high-interest personal loan to cover most of it, but even that wasn't enough to get the ring Katie wanted, so he went to Mark behind everyone's back and begged him for $5,000 to top up the ring fund. Mark said yes, partly because he felt bad, and partly because Chris framed it as his only chance to show Katie's family that he was worthy of her. That would have been bad enough on its own, but it gets so much worse. After the confrontation with my parents, Mark started getting suspicious. Chris had always been cagey about money, but after seeing how fast everything spiraled, Mark wanted answers. He started digging, piecing together bits of conversations and old texts, and what he found was nothing short of jaw-dropping. Chris never actually paid off the original loan for the ring. Instead, when wedding planning kicked into high gear, he quietly rolled the ring debt into the overall wedding budget. Every time they told my parents and me that unexpected costs were cropping up, every time they framed it as Dubai legal issues or venue-related emergencies, a piece of that money was actually going to clean up Chris' old debts. The $7,000 I gave them, the $10,000 my parents handed over, the infamous $17,000 they claimed was to save the venue booking, all of it was part of a slush fund Chris had built to juggle their wedding, his old personal loan, the engagement ring, and, incredibly, part of the deposit for the house they bought last year. Every time they cried poor to my parents, every time they played the desperate couple on the brink of losing their dream, they were covering up the fact that Chris had been living beyond his means for years and using my family's money to keep the illusion going. The most sickening part was realizing Katie either knew or didn't care. My gut says she knew enough. Maybe she didn't know every dirty detail, but Katie's never been the type to ask too many questions if the answers might ruin the fantasy. As long as the diamonds sparkled in the right light and the venue looked good in photos, the logistics were irrelevant. She wanted the proposal, the house, the luxury wedding, the curated life, and Chris, too scared and too prideful to admit they couldn't afford any of it, just kept shuffling money around and hoping no one would notice. When Mark confronted Chris, it went exactly how you'd expect. Chris lost it, screaming at Mark for trying to ruin his life, accusing him of jealousy, and painting himself as the victim. According to Mark, Chris tried to frame the whole thing as a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, swearing he was going to pay everyone back after the wedding. When Mark pointed out that Chris had been saying that for years and the debts only seemed to grow, Chris called him a traitor and hung up. As of now, the brothers aren't speaking, and Mark told me he's seriously considering suing Chris if he doesn't get his $5,000 back after the honeymoon. As for me, I've made complete peace with my decision not to go. Every new revelation has just cemented how right I was to step away when I did. There's not a single part of me that regrets missing this spectacle. My parents are still planning to go, but my dad confided that the only reason he's even willing to walk Katie down the aisle is because the sheer amount of money they've already spent makes backing out feel impossible. My mom has switched into full-on denial mode, telling herself that this is just wedding stress and everything will calm down after the honeymoon, but even she can't hide how uncomfortable she is. The trust they had in Katie is gone, and once the wedding glow wears off, that's going to be impossible for her to ignore. Whether Katie and Chris' marriage survives all this is anyone's guess, but honestly, I don't care. The way I see it, they deserve each other. They've built their entire relationship on optics, appearances, and shared delusion. Katie wants the life, the image, the envy from her friends, and Chris wants to be the man who can provide it, even if the entire foundation is held together with duct tape and loans from everyone they know. They're a perfect match, just not for any of the reasons they think. As for me, I'm done. I'm done playing the loyal big sister who gets treated like a bottomless well of emotional and financial support. I'm done being the person Katie calls when she needs a bailout, and the person she ignores the second things are going her way again. I'm done propping up this ridiculous fantasy they've built, and I'm done pretending that Katie sees me as anything other than an emergency fund with a pulse. If she ever wants to rebuild anything resembling a relationship, it's going to take a hell of a lot more than a tearful apology after the honeymoon. It's going to take actual honesty, actual accountability, and actual work, things neither she nor Chris has ever been willing to put in when there's an easier option available. I'm not holding my breath. I'm focusing on my own life, my own marriage, and the family I'm building that doesn't revolve around secrets, lies, and expensive photo ops. And if cutting myself out of their picture makes me the villain in their story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain than the sucker who keeps paying for their happy ending.